When the doors of Westminster Abbey opened, the world expected tradition, restraint, and ceremony. Instead, something happened that appeared to expose a deeper struggle over the future of the crown. William and Catherine stepped forward with a presence that felt different, less like heirs waiting patiently for their turn, and more like figures already carrying the weight of what comes next. For months, the palace had faced questions about King Charles's health and the stability of the monarchy. Officially, the gathering was simply a blessing service, a reassuring display of continuity. But the way the royal family was positioned seemed to send another message. The future had already been prepared. William looked composed, controlled, and unmistakably serious. Years of expectation had replaced the restless energy of his youth. He had learned patience under Queen Elizabeth II and discipline under his father. Now he appeared increasingly comfortable with the responsibility waiting ahead. Beside him, Catherine projected a different kind of strength. After her difficult return to public life, her image had changed. She was no longer simply the quiet future queen standing beside William. She appeared more resolved, more deliberate, and more aware of the reassurance her presence could provide. But then attention shifted. One place was suddenly impossible to ignore. Camilla, expected to enter alongside the king as a symbol of unity, had not appeared as anticipated. In a ceremony built around precision, even a small deviation could attract attention. And for those watching the family's internal dynamics, her absence seemed to raise an uncomfortable question. Was the monarchy really as united as it wanted the public to believe? Camilla's journey into the royal family had taken years. Since Queen Elizabeth II's death, she had established a clear identity as queen consort, determined to make her position meaningful. Her relationship with William, however, had always existed within a complicated family history. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere remained calm on the surface. But underneath that calm, the carefully constructed image of unity appeared increasingly fragile. Then the ceremony began to move away from the script. The bells sounded through the Abbey. Clergy prepared for the next part of the service. Officials watched every movement. The royal household had spent months arranging details, from seating to entrances, because in a place like Westminster Abbey, symbolism matters almost as much as words. And then the great wooden doors opened. A figure entered with an urgency that immediately changed the atmosphere. Camilla moved forward, apparently refusing to follow the quieter route that had been prepared. Her approach drew attention because it placed her directly within a space dominated by William and Catherine. Faces tightened, clergy hesitated. The carefully controlled rhythm of the service suddenly felt uncertain. William barely moved. His posture remained disciplined, but the tension was visible in the smallest details. Catherine noticed the disruption too. Rather than react dramatically, she remained composed, allowing a brief glance to communicate what words did not. Then came the moment that changed the entire tone of the ceremony. Camilla appeared to move toward the sacred area and speak urgently with those nearby. The public could not hear everything, but the disruption was enough to interrupt the rhythm of the service. For a few seconds, Westminster Abbey fell into an unnatural silence. That silence mattered because the ceremony was supposed to communicate continuity. Instead, it appeared to reveal a struggle over relevance, visibility, and influence, and King Charles noticed. He understood that the problem was bigger than an awkward entrance. The monarchy was already under pressure to project stability. Any public fracture, especially during a ceremony designed to reassure the nation, risked becoming a symbol of something much larger. The king did not react with an outburst. He reacted with control. As the service resumed, the atmosphere remained tense. Charles appeared to recognize that the moment had created an opportunity to make something clear. Authority within the monarchy could not depend on competing personalities. It had to be defined by duty and by the future of the institution. Then came the symbolic gesture that would dominate the story. Charles moved toward the sanctuary. There was no dramatic announcement, no speech, no attempt to create spectacle. Yet his movement carried enormous meaning because it appeared to redirect attention toward William and Catherine. The crown itself became the visual center of the moment. William stood ready, Catherine remained composed beside him, and Charles, despite the weight of his years, appeared deliberate and firm. Across the aisle, Camilla was left in a position that made the contrast impossible to miss. Whatever had happened moments earlier, the message now seemed clear. The future of the monarchy was being placed firmly in the hands of its next generation. This was not presented as an abdication. It was not an official transfer of the throne, but symbolically it felt like something had changed, and that distinction is important, because the most powerful moments inside royal institutions are not always the ones announced publicly. Sometimes they happen through positioning, visibility, schedules, and the quiet decisions made after the cameras stop recording. That is exactly what happened next. When the royal convoy returned to Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted from ceremony to calculation. Inside the palace, the events of Westminster Abbey were no longer simply an uncomfortable moment. They had become a question of control. Charles was faced with a choice. He could allow the incident to disappear into the background, or he could use it as a reason to reshape how the monarchy presented itself. The response was reportedly quiet rather than dramatic. There was no public dismissal, no confrontation played out before cameras. Instead, responsibilities, appearances, and schedules began to change. Events that had once provided Camilla with significant visibility were reconsidered. Balcony appearances could be limited. State receptions could be adjusted. Public roles could be redistributed. Her title remained, but the influence surrounding that title appeared narrower, and that distinction made the shift even more significant, because removing someone from a position is obvious. Reducing their influence without announcing it is far harder to detect, and potentially far more powerful. Meanwhile, William and Catherine were brought closer to the center of the monarchy's public operation. Their role was no longer simply to represent the future. They were increasingly positioned as the people who could stabilize the institution in the present. William's working schedule became more demanding. Briefings, diplomatic information, security updates, and media strategy were increasingly important parts of his responsibilities. The waiting period was beginning to look different. William was not simply preparing for a crown that might arrive years later. He was learning how to exercise authority while his father remained king. Catherine's role evolved alongside his. Her strength came through a different channel. She could shape public perception without appearing to demand power. Her appearances emphasized steadiness, warmth, and continuity at a time when the monarchy needed all three. Together, William and Catherine offered something the palace desperately needed, a clear image of the future. And as their visibility increased, another change became easier to notice. Camilla's presence became less central. The shift did not need a dramatic announcement. It could be seen in invitations, schedules, public appearances, and the amount of attention given to different members of the family. By mid-2074, the pattern appeared increasingly difficult to ignore. The monarchy was developing a new rhythm. Charles remained the authority at the top. William increasingly represented the future. Catherine strengthened the public connection between the institution and the people. And Camilla appeared to be moving further from the center of that picture. But perhaps the most interesting part was what happened behind closed doors. Royal institutions rarely change overnight. They change through hundreds of small decisions. A desk moves, an advisor is replaced, a briefing goes to one office before another, a speaking order changes. A seating arrangement sends a subtle signal, a patronage is reassigned. Individually, these details seem insignificant. Together, they can completely alter where power sits. That appeared to be happening within the royal household. People who had once been closely associated with Camilla's influence reportedly found themselves replaced or moved aside. Younger advisors increasingly aligned with the needs of William and Catherine. The transformation was not announced. It simply became the new normal. And that is why the Westminster Abbey moment mattered so much to the larger story. Whether viewed as a genuine confrontation or as a symbolic turning point, it represented the same underlying reality. The monarchy could no longer avoid the question of what came next. Charles had inherited an institution shaped by decades of his mother's reign. His challenge was to preserve it while preparing it for a very different future. William represented that future. Catherine represented another crucial element, public trust. Together they offered a version of the monarchy that could appear younger, more accessible, and more stable without completely abandoning tradition. For Charles, that meant making difficult choices. A king can be personally loyal and still place the institution first. That may have been the central lesson of this entire episode. If Charles believed that internal competition was weakening the monarchy's image, then strengthening William and Catherine was not simply about rewarding his son. It was about protecting the crown beyond his own reign. But there was another reason the moment could not simply be dismissed as an awkward interruption. Royal ceremonies are constructed almost like theatre, with every entrance, pause, and position carrying meaning. When something breaks that pattern, observers naturally ask why. Was it a genuine clash of personalities, a misunderstanding of protocol, or simply a moment exaggerated by the intensity of the occasion? The answer remains part of the mystery. What matters for the story is what followed. The royal family's public image appeared to become increasingly centered on Charles, William, and Catherine as a carefully connected line of continuity. That made every later appearance more significant. William's growing responsibilities could now be interpreted not merely as routine preparation, but as evidence that the palace wanted the public to become comfortable with his leadership. Catherine's presence reinforced the same message from another direction. She made the transition feel human and familiar rather than abrupt. And for a monarchy built on continuity, that may be the most effective strategy of all. Introduce the future gradually, until one day the future no longer feels new. The consequences became increasingly visible. William's public presence sharpened. He spoke with greater confidence. His decisions appeared more deliberate. He no longer seemed like someone waiting for permission to become king someday. He appeared like someone learning how to lead before that day arrived. Catherine matched that evolution. Her influence did not come from demanding attention, it came from consistency. She could stand beside William and make the future look natural rather than forced. That may be why their combined presence became so powerful. They did not need to announce that the monarchy was changing, they embodied the change. Meanwhile, the significance of Camilla's reduced visibility became harder to separate from the larger transition. If her role was becoming narrower, William and Catherine's role was becoming wider. The center of gravity was moving, not through a coup, not through an official transfer, not through a dramatic declaration, through a gradual recalibration. And that is where the story becomes far more intriguing, because the crown does not only belong to the person wearing it, it also belongs to the person shaping what the institution will look like after them. Charles may have understood that better than anyone. His reign was never simply about occupying the throne. It was about leaving the monarchy prepared for William. Every decision that brought his son forward reduced the distance between the present and the future. Every appearance involving William and Catherine made their eventual reign feel less like a distant possibility and more like an approaching reality. And that brings us back to Westminster Abbey. The ceremony began as an attempt to reassure. Instead, it exposed tension. A disruption appeared to challenge the carefully planned image of unity. Charles responded not with chaos, but with control. William and Catherine emerged with greater symbolic weight, and the palace that followed began quietly adjusting itself around that reality. Perhaps the most striking part is that no single moment officially declared a change in power. There was no proclamation saying that William had become the real authority. There was no announcement stripping Camilla of her position. There was no formal ceremony handing the crown to Catherine, yet the atmosphere appeared different. The hierarchy looked different. The future suddenly felt closer. And once an institution begins operating as though the next chapter has already started, the public eventually notices. That may be the real meaning behind the crown quietly changing hands. Not that Charles stopped being king, not that William suddenly became king, but that the balance of influence began moving toward the generation that will eventually inherit the institution. History rarely announces its turning points in advance. Sometimes the most important changes happen in silence. A glance, a seat, a schedule, a decision made behind a closed door. A son standing beside his father while the world realizes he no longer looks like a child waiting for his future. And perhaps that was what Westminster Abbey revealed more clearly than any official statement could have. The monarchy was not standing still, it was preparing. William and Catherine were no longer simply supporting characters in the story of Charles's reign. They were becoming central figures in the story of what comes after it. And if the events surrounding that ceremony truly marked a shift, then the most important question is no longer whether William will one day inherit the crown. It is how much of the monarchy's future is already being shaped by him today, because sometimes power does not change hands with a crown placed on someone's head. Sometimes it changes through confidence, responsibility, visibility, and the quiet realization that the future has already begun. So what do you think Westminster Abbey truly revealed about the balance of power inside the royal family? Was it simply a tense ceremonial moment, or did it signal something much bigger about William and Catherine's growing role? Let us know your thoughts and stay with us for the next chapter of this unfolding royal story.